Imagine building a $1 billion company in your college dorm, only to have your husband steal it, erase your name from history, and use the same technology you created to spy on you inside your own home. This is not fiction. This is Sarah Mitchell's nightmare. A pregnant mother, betrayed in the courtroom, humiliated online, and attacked with AI deepfakes designed to destroy her life. But what Marcus never expected was that his own stepdaughter would outsmart him and turn the entire internet against him. What happens next is a story of surveillance, betrayal, and a digital war that will leave you speechless. Stay with us until the end, because the justice you're about to witness is unlike anything you've ever seen. And if you believe no woman should ever fight alone, hit that like button, drop a comment, share the story, and subscribe for more true viral dramas that matter. The live stream counter hit 50,000 viewers as Sarah Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in the defendant's chair, her pregnant belly straining against the courtroom table. The chat exploded with hashtags: #justice for Sarah, #tech mogul divorce, #digital deception. Your Honor, Marcus Mitchell's attorney Victoria Cross stood confidently, her $2,000 suit immaculate under the courthouse lights. My client built data vault solutions from nothing. Mrs. Mitchell contributed minimal technical input before abandoning the company for domestic life. Sarah's hands trembled as she watched her husband of 8 years sit smugly beside his new girlfriend, Brooke Sterling. The 28-year-old lifestyle influencer had 2 million followers hanging on every courtroom update. That's completely false, Sarah whispered to her public defender, David Thompson. The overworked attorney barely looked up from his notes. We'll address that, David muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Judge Rebecca Walsh called for order as the gallery buzzed with reporters and social media influencers. Mr. Thompson, present your client's case. David stood slowly. Your Honor, Mrs. Mitchell co-founded Data Vault in her MIT dorm room. She holds multiple patents and— Objection, Victoria interrupted. Mrs. Mitchell signed comprehensive transfer agreements. We have blockchain-verified documentation. Sarah's heart sank. Those documents. She remembered signing routine insurance updates last year. Marcus had rushed her through them while she was dealing with morning sickness. The plaintiff seeks full custody of the unborn twins, Victoria continued, plus dissolution of all marital assets. Mrs. Mitchell poses a flight risk and has demonstrated financial irresponsibility. The live stream comments grew vicious. Pregnant welfare queen, gold digger, lazy wife trying to steal billions. Sarah's 16-year-old daughter Madison sat in the gallery, furiously typing on her phone. The sharp teenager from Sarah's first marriage had always been her fiercest defender. Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Walsh addressed her directly, do you have evidence supporting your co-founder claims? Sarah started to speak, but her phone buzzed with an anonymous text. He's not done destroying you. Check your crypto wallet. A friend. Her stomach dropped. She'd forgotten about the small cryptocurrency account Marcus had set up for her years ago, supposedly as a fun investment. Her fingers shook as she logged in. The balance showed zero. Every coin had been transferred yesterday to an account she didn't recognize. Sarah's voice cracked. Your Honor, I need to review some financial documents. Marcus leaned toward Brooke, whispering something that made her smile. The influencer's ring light caught the gesture perfectly for her Instagram story. We'll recess for 15 minutes, Judge Walsh announced. As the courtroom emptied, Sarah stared at her phone screen. 7 years of cryptocurrency growth, gone. She pulled up their joint bank accounts. Frozen. Credit cards canceled. Even her health insurance showed as terminated. David appeared beside her, loosening his tie. Sarah, we need to talk. What about? Marcus's team made an offer. If you agree to minimal custody and no alimony, they'll provide a modest settlement. $200,000. Sarah laughed bitterly. $200,000? I helped build a company worth $3 billion. Can you prove that in court? The question hung in the air like digital static. Marcus had always handled the legal documentation. She'd trusted him completely, the brilliant MIT graduate who'd promised to handle the business side while she focused on innovation. Madison appeared at her elbow. Mom, we need to talk, now. Not now, honey. Yes, now. Madison's voice carried unusual urgency. Meet me in the bathroom. Don't bring your phone. Something in her daughter's tone made Sarah listen. She followed Madison to the women's restroom, where the teenager immediately checked for empty stalls. Mom, Dad's been planning this for years. What do you mean? I've been tracking his digital footprint since last Christmas. He's been moving assets offshore, setting up shell companies, building fake evidence. Sarah felt the room spin. Madison, that's impossible. Is it? Remember when he upgraded our smart home system? Every conversation, every phone call, every movement, he's been recording everything. The realization hit like ice water. The new security cameras, the voice assistants, the smart doorbells. Marcus had insisted on the latest technology for their family's safety. There's more, Madison continued. Brooke isn't just his girlfriend. She's a corporate spy. I've been catfishing her for weeks, and she's working with at least 5 other tech moguls. How do you know this? Madison pulled out a burner phone. Because I'm better at digital detective work than they think. Mom, this isn't just a divorce, it's corporate warfare, and you're the target. Back in the courtroom, Sarah returned to find Marcus smirking at his phone. Brooke was live streaming to her followers, painting Sarah as an unstable gold digger trying to steal a hardworking man's fortune. Judge Walsh resumed proceedings. Mr. Thompson, does your client have additional evidence? David glanced at Sarah nervously. Your Honor, we request a continuance to review recently discovered financial documents. Denied. Present your case now or rest. Sarah watched her life crumble in real time. The live stream viewers had grown to 100,000, with betting pools on the outcome. Tech blogs were already writing think pieces about startup wife syndrome. Your Honor, Victoria stood again. We have one final piece of evidence. DNA testing confirming the twins are not my client's biological children. The courtroom erupted. Sarah shot to her feet, her chair clattering backward. That's impossible. But Victoria was already presenting lab reports, complete with official seals and signatures. The documents looked authentic, professional, devastating. Marcus's face showed practiced shock and betrayal. Brooke reached over to comfort him, her ring light capturing every angle for social media. Furthermore, Victoria continued, we have audio recordings of Mrs. Mitchell confessing her affair to her therapist. The speakers crackled to life with Sarah's voice, crystal clear. I don't know how to tell Marcus the babies aren't his. I've been seeing Jake Williams behind his back for months. Sarah's world tilted. She'd never said those words. She'd never had an affair. But the voice was unmistakably hers, every inflection, every pause, perfectly reproduced. The hashtag #SarahLied began trending within minutes. This is fake, Sarah shouted over the courtroom chaos. It's artificial intelligence. He's using deepfake technology. But her protests were drowned out by the mob mentality of social media. The story had everything: tech billionaire betrayal, pregnancy drama, corporate espionage. It was viral gold. Judge Walsh banged her gavel repeatedly. Order. We'll recess until tomorrow morning. As the courtroom cleared, Sarah sat alone, watching her reputation burn in real time across every screen in America. Her parents had already called, their voices cold with disappointment. Friends were blocking her on social media. The harassment was swift and merciless. Madison appeared beside her again. Mom, don't give up. I found something big. What could possibly help now? Dad made one mistake. He recorded everything, but he forgot about blockchain verification. I've been building our own evidence file, and it's all cryptographically verified to prevent tampering. Sarah looked at her daughter, brilliant, determined, fearless in the face of digital warfare. What do we do now? We fight back, but first you need to know something else. Judge Walsh isn't random. Her son died in a data vault-related accident last year. Dad covered it up, but she doesn't know he's responsible yet. The pieces of a larger conspiracy began falling into place. Sarah's phone buzzed with another anonymous message. Your daughter is next. Back off or she disappears. Terror shot through her veins. Marcus wasn't just destroying her marriage. He was threatening her child. Madison noticed her expression. What is it? Sarah showed her the text. For the first time, her confident daughter looked genuinely scared. "We need help," Sarah whispered. "I know someone," Madison replied. "But you're not going to like how I found them." 24 hours after the courtroom disaster, Sarah sat in a 24-hour diner at 3 a.m., waiting for Madison's mysterious contact. Her daughter had been cryptic about their source, only saying they'd understand the full scope of Marcus's operation. The pregnancy exhaustion weighed heavily, but sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard her own voice confessing to crimes she'd never committed. The deepfake audio had been analyzed by 3 independent experts. All concluded it was technically impossible to prove artificial generation without the original source code. Madison slid into the booth across from her, followed by an unexpected figure. A woman in her 40s with short-cropped hair and tired eyes. "Mom, this is Detective Lisa Anderson, LAPD Cybercrime Division." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You're a police officer?" "Former," Anderson corrected, sliding a tablet across the table. "I quit after investigating Data Vault's role in 17 traffic fatalities. The department buried my report." The tablet showed a complex web diagram connecting Data Vault to multiple corporations, government agencies, and private individuals. Marcus's face sat at the center, like a spider. "Your husband isn't just running a data company," Anderson explained. "He's operating a surveillance and manipulation network that makes Cambridge Analytica look like a garage sale." Sarah studied the connections. "How does Madison know you?" "She's been hacking corporate networks for 6 months, looking for evidence about your marriage. Smart kid. She found my sealed investigation and reached out." Madison shifted uncomfortably. "I may have broken a few laws." "More than a few," Anderson said, but her tone was approving. "She's uncovered corruption that federal agencies missed." Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications. The viral courthouse footage had been remixed into TikTok compilations, each one painting her as a scheming adulteress. Her follower count on social media was plummeting, while harassment messages flooded in. "The public humiliation is intentional," Anderson continued. "Marcus has been planning this character assassination for years. He's done it to other women too." "Other women?" Anderson swiped to show profiles of 3 women, all former business partners or wives of tech moguls, all destroyed by similar scandals involving fake evidence and social media campaigns. Jennifer Walsh, former CTO of TechFlow, accused of embezzlement after discovering illegal surveillance programs. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, former head of AI ethics at Quantum Tech. Career ended when deepfake videos showed her accepting bribes. Lisa Morrison, former wife of CloudStream's CEO, lost custody of her children after fabricated evidence of drug use. Sarah's blood ran cold. "What happened to them?" "Jennifer works at a coffee shop in Portland. Amanda teaches high school. Lisa didn't make it. Suicide last year." The weight of systematic destruction settled over the table. This wasn't just about her marriage, it was about silencing women who threatened the tech industry's power structure. "But we have something they didn't," Madison interjected, pulling out her laptop. "Blockchain verification and real-time evidence collection." The screen showed a sophisticated dashboard tracking Marcus's digital activities. Financial transfers, communication logs, location data, everything cryptographically stamped to prevent manipulation. "Madison's been building this for months," Anderson explained. "She figured out how to turn Marcus's own surveillance network against him." "How?" Madison grinned. "I catfished Brooke Sterling on Instagram, gained access to her private accounts, then used her credentials to infiltrate the corporate spy network. They've been sloppy because they never expected a 16-year-old to outmaneuver them." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and terror. Her daughter was brilliant, but she was also in mortal danger. "The text message threatening Madison," Sarah said. "How seriously should I take that?" Anderson's expression darkened. "Very. Marcus has connections to private security firms that specialize in making problems disappear. We need to move fast." Madison pulled up another screen showing real-time social media analysis. "The good news is public opinion is starting to shift. Some people are questioning the audio evidence, especially after that viral TikTok explaining deepfake technology. The viral video had been created by a teenage computer science student from Texas, explaining how AI could perfectly replicate anyone's voice with just 20 minutes of audio samples. It had been viewed 12 million times in 18 hours. We need more than public opinion, Sarah said. We need proof that it holds up in court. We have it, Madison replied, opening an encrypted folder. Marcus and Brooke recorded themselves planning the whole operation. They got sloppy during a video call last week. The audio file began playing, Marcus's voice clear and undeniable. The DNA lab is cooperative. 500,000 for their cooperation, and Sarah's medical records get modified retroactively. The twins' paternity becomes questionable. Brooke's voice responded, "What about the judge?" Walsh seems sympathetic to wives. Walsh is perfect, actually. Her son died in that autonomous vehicle accident. The data vault facial recognition failure I covered up. If she finds out I'm responsible, she'll recuse herself or become completely biased against me. Either way, we win. And if Sarah fights back, she won't. The social media campaign will destroy her credibility. No one believes discredited women anymore. It's the perfect crime. Sarah listened to her husband's voice with growing horror and rage. The coldness, the calculation, the complete lack of remorse. She'd been married to a monster. This recording proves conspiracy, fraud, and conspiracy to commit perjury, Anderson said. But there's a problem. What? I'm no longer law enforcement. This evidence needs to go through proper channels, and Marcus has judges and prosecutors in his pocket. Madison looked up from her laptop. Not all of them. I've been researching Judge Walsh's background. Her son Michael died when his Tesla's autopilot failed to recognize a stopped school bus. Data Vault provided the facial recognition software that was supposed to prevent exactly that scenario. She doesn't know Marcus was responsible? Not yet, but if we can prove his company's negligence caused her son's death, she'll have every reason to ensure justice is served. Sarah's phone rang. David Thompson, her public defender. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Marcus offered my law firm a retainer deal worth $2 million. All I have to do is recommend you accept his settlement offer. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. You're supposed to represent me. I am representing you. Take the deal. You can't win against Marcus Mitchell. Sarah hung up without responding. Even her own lawyer had been bought. We're completely on our own, she said. No, Madison corrected. We have each other and we have the truth. In the digital age, that's more powerful than money. Anderson nodded. Your daughter is right. Marcus's biggest mistake was underestimating both of you. He sees women as victims, not adversaries. Sarah looked at the evidence spread across the table. Financial records, communication logs, video files, blockchain-verified documentation. Her daughter had built a digital fortress around the truth. What's our next move? We go public, Madison said, but not through traditional media. They're all controlled by tech advertising dollars. We use social media, but we do it smart. How? Viral justice. We live stream the evidence reveal, but we do it during tomorrow's court session. Judge Walsh deserves to know the truth about her son's death, and the world deserves to know about Marcus's conspiracy. Anderson smiled for the first time all night. I like it. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, especially when it's broadcast to millions of people simultaneously. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Her daughter's generation understood digital warfare better than any corporate executive. They'd grown up online, and they knew how to fight there. What about the threats against Madison? We turn them into evidence too, Madison replied, pulling up her security protocols. I've been recording everything, including the location data from those threatening texts. Marcus doesn't realize he's confessing to witness intimidation in real time. What? Sarah looked at her remarkable daughter. Fearless, brilliant, and absolutely determined to see justice served. The tech moguls of Silicon Valley were about to learn that they'd underestimated the wrong family. Let's bring them down, Sarah said. Judge Walsh's courtroom filled early the next morning, with overflow crowds watching the live stream. The #TechMogul trial was trending worldwide, and major news networks had picked up the story. Sarah noticed Marcus seemed unusually agitated, constantly checking his phone. Your Honor, Victoria Cross stood confidently, we request immediate resolution. Mrs. Mitchell's refusal to accept our generous settlement demonstrates her intention to profit from false accusations. David Thompson barely looked at Sarah as he stood. Your Honor, my client accepts the defendant's settlement offer. I do not, Sarah declared, rising to her feet. The courtroom buzzed with surprise. Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Walsh said carefully, are you firing your attorney? I am representing myself, Your Honor, and I have significant evidence of fraud and conspiracy. Marcus leaned forward, his face darkening. Brooks stopped her live stream for the first time in 2 days. Your Honor, Victoria interrupted. Mrs. Mitchell is clearly emotionally unstable. These pregnancy hormones and public humiliation have affected her judgment. I'm perfectly stable, Sarah replied, pulling out Madison's tablet. I have blockchain-verified evidence of a conspiracy involving day fraud, AI-generated audio, and witness tampering. Judge Walsh's eyebrows rose. Present your evidence. Sarah connected the tablet to the courtroom's display system. The evidence dashboard appeared on screens throughout the room, with live data streams and cryptographic verification codes. This is documentation of my husband's systematic plan to destroy my reputation and steal my share of Data Vault Solutions. The first file played, Marcus and Brooks recorded conversation about bribing the DNA lab. The courtroom fell silent as his voice filled the space. What about the judge? Walsh seems sympathetic to wives. Walsh is perfect, actually. Her son died in that autonomous vehicle accident. The Data Vault facial recognition failure I covered up. Judge Walsh's face went white. She gripped her gavel so tightly her knuckles showed. Marcus shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is obviously fabricated evidence. Is it? Sarah replied, pulling up the blockchain verification. Every file is cryptographically stamped with immutable timestamps. The audio was recorded from Mr. Mitchell's own smart home system, the same surveillance network he used to spy on our family. Victoria looked genuinely shaken for the first time. Your Honor, we object to this illegal surveillance evidence. The surveillance was conducted by Mr. Mitchell himself, Sarah explained. I'm simply presenting recordings from his own security system, which monitored our shared marital residence. Judge Walsh found her voice. Mr. Mitchell, did your company provide facial recognition software for autonomous vehicles? Marcus's lawyer grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. Your Honor, that's proprietary business information. My son, Michael Walsh, died when his Tesla failed to recognize a stopped school bus, Judge Walsh continued, her voice growing stronger. The accident report cited facial recognition software failure. Was that your company's technology? The courtroom held its breath. Brooke had stopped live streaming entirely, her face pale as she realized the implications. Sarah played another file, internal Data Vault emails discussing the Tesla contract and the known software flaws they'd failed to report. We can patch the recognition failure after the government contract is signed, Marcus's voice read from the email. One accident is acceptable risk for a billion-dollar deal. Judge Walsh stood abruptly. This court will recess for 1 hour. As the courtroom cleared, Marcus cornered Sarah near the defendant's table. His polished facade had cracked completely. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he hissed. I can destroy you and Madison with a single phone call. Madison appeared beside them, her phone recording. Go ahead, Dad. Threaten us on camera. My followers would love to see the real Marcus Mitchell. Marcus noticed the recording and stepped back, forcing his professional smile. But the mask was slipping. When court resumed, Judge Walsh looked like a different person. Her previous judicial caution had been replaced by focused determination. Before we continue, she announced, I must disclose that Mr. Mitchell's company may have been involved in the traffic accident that killed my son. However, rather than recuse myself, I believe this connection gives me additional motivation to ensure justice is served. Victoria was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, bias concerns require a recusal. Noted and denied. This court will thoroughly examine all evidence of corporate negligence and criminal conspiracy. Sarah presented file after file. The fake DNA lab payments, the bribed witnesses, the deepfake audio technology, the network of corporate spies led by Brooke Sterling. Each piece of evidence was blockchain verified and immune to manipulation. The live stream audience grew to 2 million viewers as the conspiracy unfolded in real time. Tech reporters were frantically fact-checking the revelations, confirming Sarah's evidence against multiple databases. Furthermore, Sarah continued, I have evidence that this conspiracy extends beyond my marriage. Mr. Mitchell and his associates have systematically destroyed the careers of multiple women who threaten their corporate interests. She displayed the profiles of other victims, Jennifer Walsh, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, Lisa Morrison. The pattern was undeniable. Marcus's phone rang continuously as Data Vault's stock price began plummeting. Board members were calling emergency meetings. Regulatory agencies were launching investigations. Your Honor, Victoria made one final attempt. Even if these allegations are true, they don't change the fundamental custody and asset questions. Actually, they do, Judge Walsh replied. Evidence of systematic fraud, conspiracy, and witness tampering affects every aspect of this case. Sarah played her final piece of evidence, a recording of Marcus admitting the twins were his biological children. The DNA fraud was genius, his voice declared. Sarah will never fight for kids she thinks aren't mine. Revenge is sweeter when they think they've lost everything. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters rushed to file stories. Social media exploded with outrage. Marcus sat frozen as his billion-dollar empire crumbled around him. But the most significant reaction came from an unexpected source: federal agents entering the courtroom with arrest warrants. Marcus Mitchell, Agent Sarah Coleman announced, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, witness tampering, and vehicular manslaughter. As handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, Brooke Sterling was simultaneously arrested by cybercrime specialists. Her corporate spy network had been monitoring government communications, a federal crime carrying 20-year sentences. The live stream reached 5 million viewers as justice played out in real time. Hashtag justice for Sarah transformed into hashtag digital revolution as other victims began coming forward with their own evidence. Judge Walsh banged her gavel one final time. All Marshall assets are frozen pending criminal investigation. Custody of the twins is awarded to Mrs. Mitchell. This court will also be referring Data Vault solutions to federal regulators for comprehensive review. Sarah felt her knees buckle with relief. Madison caught her arm, grinning with pride. We did it, Mom. You did it, Sarah corrected. You saved our family. As they left the courthouse, Sarah's phone buzzed with interview requests from every major news outlet. Her story had become a symbol of resistance against corporate power and digital manipulation. But more importantly, she was free. Free from Marcus's control, free from his surveillance, free from his lies. The twins would grow up knowing their mother had fought for truth and won. The tech mogul's digital deception had been exposed, and the age of accountability had begun. 3 weeks after Marcus's arrest, Sarah sat in a federal prosecutor's office, watching Agent Coleman present evidence to a grand jury via video link. The investigation had exploded beyond anyone's expectations, revealing a corruption network spanning dozens of companies and hundreds of victims. Mrs. Mitchell, Agent Coleman said, turning from the screen, your daughter's evidence has helped us build cases against 17 corporate executives, 5 judges, and 12 law firms. Madison beamed with pride from her chair beside Sarah. The teenager had become something of a celebrity in cybersecurity circles, with MIT and Stanford competing for her early admission. What about the other victims? Sarah asked. Jennifer Walsh is testifying next week. Dr. Rodriguez has been reinstated at Quantum Tech with full back pay. We're building a civil rights case around the systematic targeting of women in tech. Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications from her new nonprofit, the Digital Truth Project. Donations had reached $50 million from supporters worldwide, and victims were reaching out daily for help rebuilding their lives. A knock on the door interrupted their meeting. Agent Coleman frowned. The session was supposed to be private. Dentok Williams, Cybercrime Division, the newcomer announced. We have a problem. Williams played a recording from Marcus's prison phone calls. Despite being in federal custody, he was still coordinating with outside associates. The Sarah problem isn't over, Marcus's voice declared. She's made herself a target for every tech executive in Silicon Valley. Accidents happen, especially to pregnant women. Sarah's blood ran cold. Even from prison, Marcus was orchestrating threats. We're moving you to protective custody, Agent Coleman said immediately, and we're accelerating the prosecution timeline. No, Madison interjected. He's trying to scare us into hiding. If we disappear now, other victims won't come forward. Agent Williams shook his head. Miss Carter, this isn't a game. We've intercepted communications suggesting imminent threats. Then let's use that, Madison replied, pulling out her laptop. We turn the threats into evidence, just like before. Sarah watched her daughter's fingers fly across the keyboard, accessing encrypted communications in blockchain networks with casual expertise. I've been monitoring the corporate spy network since Brooks' arrest, Madison explained. Five major CEOs are planning a coordinated response to discredit Mom and stop the federal investigation. The screen showed a complex web of communications between TechFlow's CEO David Harrison, CloudStream's Jonathan Pierce, and three other tech moguls. They were planning to fund a massive disinformation campaign, painting Sarah as an unstable opportunist. More importantly, Madison continued, they're planning to eliminate the evidence by destroying Data Vault's servers. Agent Coleman leaned forward. When? Tonight. They think the feds are moving too slowly, so they're taking direct action. Agent Williams was already on his radio, coordinating with the FBI's Corporate Crimes Division. We need immediate surveillance on all Data Vault facilities. Wait, Madison said, holding up her hand. What if we let them try? I can document everything in real time, creating ironclad evidence of obstruction of justice. Sarah grabbed her daughter's arm. Absolutely not. This is too dangerous. Mom, this is bigger than us now. Hundreds of women have been destroyed by this network. If we can expose the entire conspiracy, we can prevent it from happening to anyone else. Agent Coleman considered the proposal. Could you monitor their activities without putting yourself at risk? I've been inside their communications for weeks, Madison replied. They still don't know their network is compromised. Sarah felt torn between protecting her daughter and supporting her brilliant plan. The teenager had proven herself repeatedly, but the stakes kept escalating. What about Marcus's threats? Sarah asked. Let him threaten us, Madison replied with startling confidence. Every threat becomes evidence. Every criminal action gets recorded. We're building an unbreakable case. Agent Williams looked skeptical. Ms. Carter, these people have significant resources and few moral constraints. So do we, Madison shot back. The difference is we have the truth and blockchain verification. Sarah made her decision. We do it, but with full federal protection and monitoring. Agent Coleman nodded. We'll coordinate with local law enforcement and maintain constant surveillance. But at the first sign of direct physical threat, you're both going into witness protection. That evening, Sarah and Madison sat in a secure FBI safe house, surrounded by monitoring equipment and federal agents. Madison's laptop displayed real-time feeds from security cameras at Data Vault's headquarters, while other screens tracked the conspirators' communications. There, Madison pointed to her laptop screen. David Harrison just arrived at Data Vault with a team of private contractors. The security footage showed Harrison and 6 men in tactical gear entering the building with industrial-grade equipment. They weren't there for a business meeting. They were there to destroy evidence. Getting audio now, Madison reported, switching to the building's compromised surveillance system. Harrison's voice came through clearly. Everything in the server room gets physically destroyed. No traces, no recovery possible. The feds can't prosecute what doesn't exist. Agent Coleman was coordinating with SWAT teams positioned around the building. We have them on obstruction of justice and conspiracy charges. Wait, Madison said, monitoring the communications network. 3 more CEOs are coordinating similar destruction at their own facilities. CloudStream, Quantum Tech, and Metasync are all purging evidence simultaneously. Sarah watched federal agents mobilize across multiple cities. Madison's discovery had revealed a coordinated attempt to destroy evidence in the largest corporate conspiracy case in decades. There's more, Madison announced, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I'm detecting financial transfers to offshore accounts. They're liquidating assets before the government can freeze them. The screen showed millions of dollars flowing to accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. The tech moguls were preparing to flee the country. Agent Williams was shouting orders into his radio. All airports, private airfields, and maritime facilities. Corporate executives may be attempting to flee jurisdiction. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror. They were watching a massive criminal conspiracy collapse in real time. But the conspirators were growing increasingly desperate. Madison's laptop chimed with an incoming message on Marcus's communication network. Her face went pale as she read it. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "They know I'm monitoring them. Someone figured out their network is compromised." The laptop screen flickered, then went black. Madison frantically typed commands, but the connection was dead. "They've cut our access," she reported. "But it doesn't matter. We recorded everything." Agent Coleman smiled grimly. "Miss Carter, your evidence just gave us probable cause for the largest corporate raid in FBI history." As sirens wailed across the city, Sarah hugged her daughter tightly. They'd exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Silicon Valley, and justice was finally being served. But Marcus's voice echoed in her memory. "Accidents happen, especially to pregnant women." The war wasn't over yet. The FBI raids made headlines across every major news outlet. By dawn, 17 tech executives were in federal custody, and billions of dollars in assets had been frozen. Sarah watched the coverage from the safe house, marveling at how quickly the corporate empire had crumbled. "Mrs. Mitchell," Agent Coleman said, entering with fresh coffee and a stack of legal documents. "The Justice Department wants to offer you a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Full immunity for Madison's hacking activities in exchange for her testimony before Congress and cooperation with ongoing investigations." Sarah looked at her daughter, who was already awake and monitoring news coverage on her laptop. "What do you think?" "I think we've moved beyond personal protection," Madison replied. "This is about preventing systemic abuse of power." Agent Coleman sat down across from them. "There's something else. We've discovered the conspiracy goes deeper than corporate espionage. They've been manipulating elections, suppressing activists, and coordinating with foreign governments." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "How deep?" "Deep enough that the president is personally monitoring this investigation. Marcus Mitchell wasn't just destroying women's careers, he was undermining American democracy." Madison pulled up encrypted files on her laptop. "I've been analyzing the communication patterns. The corporate spy network has been active for over 5 years, targeting journalists, politicians, and civil rights leaders." The screen showed a massive web connecting tech companies to political organizations, foreign intelligence services, and criminal networks. Sarah recognized some names from recent news stories: activists who died in suspicious accidents, journalists who'd been discredited by fake scandals, politicians who dropped out of races following personal attacks. "They killed people," Sarah whispered. "We believe so," Agent Coleman confirmed, "which is why the Justice Department is treating this as a national security matter." Sarah's phone rang. Judge Walsh. "Sarah, I wanted you to know personally, Marcus pled guilty to all charges this morning. He's cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for avoiding the death penalty." The relief was overwhelming. Marcus's confession would validate everything Sarah and Madison had fought to expose. "What about the other executives?" "Most are cooperating. The evidence your daughter collected was so comprehensive that denial was impossible. She's quite remarkable." After the call ended, Sarah looked at Madison with new appreciation. Her 16-year-old daughter had single-handedly exposed the largest corporate conspiracy in American history. "The Justice Department wants me to lead a new task force on digital crimes," IGI Coleman continued. "We'd like Madison to serve as a special consultant." "I'm honored," Madison replied, "but I have a better idea." She pulled up blueprints for a digital security platform. "Instead of fighting these conspiracies after they form, we prevent them by making corporate surveillance impossible." The plans showed a blockchain-based system for verifying digital evidence, protecting whistleblowers, and exposing corporate malfeasance in real time. "It's called the Truth Network," Madison explained, "completely decentralized, impossible to manipulate, and accessible to everyone." Agent Coleman studied the technical specifications. "This is ambitious. You'd need significant funding and regulatory approval." "Actually," Sarah interjected, "we have both. The Digital Truth Project has enough donations to fund development, and Congress is fast-tracking legislation to regulate corporate surveillance." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You won the battle, but the war continues. Watch your back. The network remembers." Agent Coleman immediately began tracing the message while additional security surrounded the safe house. "They're getting desperate," Madison observed calmly. "Good. Desperate people make mistakes. Madison, these people have killed to protect their secrets." Then we make sure their secrets can't be hidden anymore. Sarah watched her daughter work with calm determination, building tools to prevent future conspiracies. The teenager understood something that seasoned federal agents were still learning. In the digital age, transparency was the ultimate weapon against corruption. Agent Williams burst into the room. We have a problem. 3 conspirators have disappeared from federal custody during transport. The escaped executives included David Harrison from TechFlow, Jonathan Pierce from CloudStream, and Dr. Elizabeth Morgan from Quantum Tech, 3 of the most dangerous members of the network. How does someone escape federal custody? Sarah asked. Inside help, Agent Coleman replied grimly. The conspiracy includes law enforcement officials. Madison looked up from her laptop. I can track them. The surveillance network works both ways. They monitored everyone else, but I monitored them. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing satellite feeds, cell tower data, and financial records. Within minutes, she'd located all 3 fugitives. Harrison is at a private airfield outside Dallas. Pierce is heading toward the Mexican border. Morgan is holed up in a compound in Montana. Agent Williams was already coordinating capture operations. How are you accessing this information? They never turned off their phones, Madison replied with a slight smile. Amateur mistake for professional spies. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. Her daughter was brilliant, but she was also becoming a target for increasingly dangerous people. Madison, after this is over, I want you to consider stepping back from active investigation. Mom, we can't stop now. There are victims all over the world who need justice. The network extended to 37 countries. Agent Coleman looked up from her briefing materials. 37 countries? Madison nodded, pulling up a global map showing corporate connections. The American conspiracy was just one node in a worldwide surveillance and manipulation network. The implications were staggering. Corporate espionage on a global scale, coordinated character assassination campaigns, and systematic suppression of dissent across multiple continents. This requires international cooperation, Agent Coleman said. Interpol, the EU, the UN, everyone needs to coordinate response. Sarah's phone rang again. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, one of the conspiracy's victims. Sarah, I wanted to thank you personally. Quantum Tech just offered me the Chief Ethics Officer position with full authority to investigate the company's participation in the surveillance network. That's wonderful news. It's more than wonderful, it's justice. Because of your courage, hundreds of victims are getting their lives back. After the call ended, Sarah looked around the safe house filled with federal agents, evidence files, and computer equipment. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a discredited wife facing divorce court. Now she was at the center of the largest corporate accountability movement in history. Agent Coleman, when can we go home? Soon. The escaped conspirators will be recaptured within 48 hours, and the immediate threat level is decreasing. Madison looked up from her laptop. Actually, I think we should stay here a bit longer. Why, Mariam? Because I just intercepted communications about a final contingency plan. If the conspirators can't escape justice, they're planning something called digital scorched earth. Agent Coleman's face darkened. What does that mean? They're going to release everyone's private data simultaneously. Every email, every text message, every digital communication from the past 5 years. Complete privacy destruction for millions of people. Sarah felt sick. Can they actually do that? Yes, Madison replied grimly. And they will, unless we stop them first. The war for digital democracy was entering its final phase. The threat was real and imminent. Madison's laptop displayed countdown timers, showing the conspirators had 12 hours to trigger their digital scorched earth protocol, the simultaneous release of private data from 500 million Americans. How much data are we talking about? Agent Coleman asked. Madison's face was pale as she read the technical specifications. Everything, every email, text message, photo, financial record, medical file, and private conversation collected by Data Vault and partner companies over 5 years. Sarah felt sick imagining the consequences. That would destroy millions of innocent people. That's the point, Agent Williams replied. If they can't escape justice, they'll take down as many people as possible. Agent Coleman was coordinating with cybersecurity agencies across the government. Can the release be stopped? Theoretically, Madison said, but it would require access to the primary servers, which are located in international waters. She pulled up satellite imagery showing a massive data center on an offshore platform near international boundaries. The facility was technically outside any nation's jurisdiction. They planned this escape route years ago, Madison continued. If things went bad, they could trigger the data release and disappear to countries without extradition treaties. Sarah's phone buzzed with calls from victims across the network. Word was spreading about the impending data release, and panic was setting in. How do we stop them? Sarah asked. Madison studied the technical diagrams. We need physical access to the servers, or we need to overload their systems from the inside. Meaning someone needs to infiltrate the offshore platform, or we flood their network with so much traffic that their servers crash before they can complete the data dump. Agent Coleman shook her head. The platform is heavily guarded by private military contractors. Physical infiltration would be a suicide mission. Then we crash their servers, Madison declared. I can coordinate a distributed denial of service attack using the same blockchain network we built for evidence verification. Sarah grabbed her daughter's arm. Madison, that's illegal. You could go to prison. Mom, 500 million people are about to lose their privacy forever. Some laws are worth breaking. Agent Williams looked conflicted. Ms. Carter, I can't officially authorize that action. Then don't, Madison replied, already typing commands. Turn around and pretend you didn't hear me. Sarah watched her daughter launch what would become the largest coordinated cyber attack in history. The truth network she'd built to protect evidence was being weaponized to protect privacy. I need help, Madison announced. The attack requires more computing power than I can generate alone. She sent encrypted messages to hacktivist groups worldwide. Anonymous, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, cybersecurity researchers, and student and computer science organizations. Within minutes, responses flooded in. Thousands of hackers across 6 continents were joining the coordinated attack on the offshore data center. 8 hours until data release, Madison reported. Measure reported, monitoring the countdown timers. The attack is building, but their defenses are stronger than expected. Sarah's phone rang. Jennifer Walsh, the former CTO whose career had been destroyed by the conspiracy. Sarah, I saw the news about the data release. I still have administrative access to some of the systems from my time at TechFlow. I can help Madison's attack. Jennifer, you could be prosecuted. They already destroyed my life once. This time, I'm fighting back. One by one, former victims of the conspiracy joined the cyber attack. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez provided access codes from Quantum Tech. Lisa Morrison's sister contributed servers from her late sister's tech company. Dozens of women who'd been silenced and then discredited were finding their voices through coordinated digital resistance. 6 hours remaining, Madison announced. We're making progress, but they're routing backup systems online. Agent Coleman was fielding calls from the highest levels of government. The president wants to know if military intervention is possible. The platform is in international waters, Agent Williams replied. Military action could trigger diplomatic incidents with multiple nations. Sarah felt helpless watching her daughter coordinate a global cyber war from a teenage laptop. The stakes were incomprehensible. The privacy of 500 million people hung in the balance. Mom, Madison said without looking up from her screen, I need you to do something. What? Call Marcus in prison. If anyone can convince the conspirators to abort the data release, it's him. Sarah recoiled. I never wanted to speak to that man again. I know, but he's the only person they might listen to. And despite everything he's done, he's still my father. The request cut deep. Sarah had spent months trying to escape Marcus's influence, but now her daughter was asking her to reach out to him one final time. What would I even say? Tell him that destroying 500 million innocent people won't change his situation. He's already facing life in prison, but helping us stop the data release might save some victims from total life destruction. Sarah looked around the room at federal agents frantically coordinating with international partners. Traditional law enforcement was failing against this digital threat. 4 hours remaining, Madison reported. The attack is successful, but they're implementing final backup protocols. Sarah made the call. Marcus answered on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting her. Sarah, I wondered if you'd call. The data release needs to stop, Marcus. You've hurt enough people. I'm in federal prison facing 3 life sentences. I have no influence over current operations. You built this network. These people trusted you. They'll listen to you. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Why should I help you after what you've done to me? Because our children deserve better than the world you've created. Madison is brilliant and good and everything you should want in a daughter. Don't let your legacy be the destruction of 500 million innocent people. Another pause. Put Madison on the phone. Sarah handed over the phone reluctantly. Dad? Madison's voice was small, vulnerable for the first time in months. Sarah couldn't hear Marcus's response, but she watched her daughter's face cycle through emotions: anger, sadness, hope, determination. I know you're not evil, Madison said finally. You're brilliant, and you build amazing things. But this has to stop, please. The conversation lasted 10 minutes. When Madison hung up, she was crying. What did he say? He gave me the abort codes, but he said the offshore team might not honor them. They're too committed to the scorched earth plan. Madison typed frantically, entering Marcus's authorization codes into the attack protocol. 2 hours remaining. The codes worked. Their primary servers are shutting down, but they're activating manual backup systems. Sarah watched the countdown timers, knowing that millions of lives hung in the balance. Her teenage daughter was coordinating a global effort to prevent the largest privacy breach in human history. 1 hour remaining, Madison announced. We're close, but they're fighting back hard. The laptop screen showed digital warfare in real time, attack vectors, defensive countermeasures, system failures, and backup activations cycling through at impossible speeds. Mom, Madison said quietly, if this doesn't work, I want you to know I'm proud of everything we've accomplished. Sarah knelt beside her daughter's chair. Madison, you've already saved more people than any teenager should have to. Whatever happens, you're a hero. 30 minutes remaining. The room fell silent except for the clicking of Madison's keyboard and the steady hum of federal agents coordinating with international partners. 10 minutes remaining. Their backups are failing, but there's one final server that's isolated from our attack. Sarah held her breath as the countdown entered its final phase. 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes. Madison's fingers flew across the keyboard in a final desperate assault on the remaining server. 2 minutes, 1 minute. The countdown hit 0. The screen flashed green. Data release aborted. All systems offline. The safe house erupted in cheers. Federal agents hugged each other. Madison collapsed back in her chair, exhausted but victorious. You did it, Sarah whispered, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug. We did it, Madison corrected. All of us together. When the digital scorched earth had been prevented, but the real work of justice was just beginning. 6 months after preventing the data release, Sarah stood before a joint session of Congress, preparing to testify about corporate surveillance and digital rights. The gallery was packed with victims, activists, and journalists documenting what many called the most important corporate accountability hearing in decades. Mrs. Mitchell, the committee chair began, your experience has exposed systematic abuse of power by America's largest technology companies. In your opinion, how do we prevent this from happening again? Sarah looked up at the packed gallery, seeing faces of women whose lives had been destroyed and then rebuilt through collective action and digital resistance. Senator, the answer isn't just regulation, it's transparency and empowerment. We need laws requiring real-time disclosure of corporate surveillance activities, blockchain verification of digital evidence, and protection for whistleblowers who expose wrongdoing. Behind her sat Madison, now 17 and attending MIT through early admission. The teenager had become the youngest person ever to testify before Congress on cybersecurity issues. Ms. Carter, another senator, addressed Madison. You've proposed something called the Truth Network. Can you explain how this would work? Madison stepped to the microphone with confidence that belied her age. Senator, the Truth Network is a decentralized platform that makes corporate surveillance impossible to hide. Every data collection activity, every algorithmic decision, every privacy violation gets recorded on an immutable blockchain that can't be manipulated or deleted. And you believe this can prevent future conspiracies? I believe transparency prevents corruption, Senator. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, especially when it's technically impossible to turn off the lights. Sarah felt profound pride watching her daughter articulate complex technical concepts to lawmakers who struggled with basic email. Madison had grown from a rebellious teenager into a digital rights pioneer. The hearing continued for 8 hours with testimony from victims, tech executives, federal investigators, and international experts. The consensus was clear. Comprehensive reform was needed to prevent corporate surveillance abuse. After the hearing, Sarah and Madison walked through the Capitol, surrounded by reporters and supporters. The Digital Truth Project had grown into a global movement with chapters in 47 countries. Mrs. Mitchell, a reporter, called out, "What's next for you and your organization?" "We're launching the International Digital Rights Alliance next month. Corporate surveillance is a global problem that requires global solutions." Sarah's phone buzzed with updates from the criminal trials. Marcus had been sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, while his co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. Brooke Sterling was serving 8 years for corporate espionage. But the most satisfying news came from the civil lawsuits. Data Vault Solutions had been dissolved, with its assets distributed to victims through a $500 million settlement fund. Other conspiracy companies faced similar consequences. "Mom," Madison said as they reached their car, "I got accepted to Stanford's graduate computer science program." Sarah stopped walking. "Graduate program? You're 17. They're letting me skip undergraduate coursework based on my work with the Truth Network. I could have my PhD by 21. What about being a normal teenager?" Madison laughed. "Mom, normal teenagers don't expose billion-dollar conspiracies and testify before Congress. I think that ship has sailed." Sarah hugged her extraordinary daughter, remembering the scared pregnant woman who'd sat in divorce court just 18 months ago. Everything had changed, but the bond between them had only grown stronger. That evening, they attended a reunion dinner with other conspiracy victims. Jennifer Walsh had been promoted to Chief Technology Officer at a major Silicon Valley firm. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez was leading ethics reform at Quantum Tech. Even Lisa Morrison's sister had found justice. The family's wrongful death lawsuit had resulted in a $50 million settlement. "Sarah," Jennifer raised her glass, "I want to propose a toast. 18 months ago, we were isolated victims fighting powerful corporations alone. Tonight, we're leaders of a global movement that's changing how technology companies operate worldwide." The group raised their glasses in celebration, but Sarah felt a nagging concern. Victory was sweet, but she'd learned to be wary of powerful enemies. After dinner, Sarah and Madison drove through downtown Austin, past the former Data Vault headquarters that now housed a digital rights research center. The building's facade displayed a giant banner, "Transparency is Accountability." "Madison, do you ever regret getting involved in all this?" "Are you kidding? We prevented the largest privacy breach in history, exposed global corporate corruption, and built tools that protect millions of people. How could I regret that?" Sarah's phone rang. Agent Coleman calling with an update on international investigations. "Sarah, I wanted you to know Interpol just arrested the remaining fugitive conspirators. The last members of the network are now in custody." "That's wonderful news." "There's more. Based on evidence Madison collected, investigators have uncovered similar networks in 12 countries. Your work has triggered a global accountability movement." After the call ended, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. The digital nightmare was finally over, but Madison was already planning the next phase of their work. "Mom, I've been thinking about something bigger than corporate surveillance." "What do you mean?" "What if we could use blockchain technology to make all government activities transparent? Real-time disclosure of political donations, lobbying activities, regulatory decisions, complete democratic transparency." Sarah smiled at her daughter's ambition. "One global conspiracy at a time, Madison. Actually, I've already started preliminary research." Sarah pulled over, looking at her brilliant, determined daughter with a mixture of pride and exasperation. "Madison, you're 17 years old. Don't you want to have a normal life?" "Mom, this is my normal life. I'm good at this work, and the world needs it. Besides, someone has to keep the powerful people honest." As they drove home to their new house, purchased with settlement money from Marcus's corporate assets, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. The scared, pregnant woman in divorce court had become a global advocate for digital rights. The rebellious teenager had become a pioneering cybersecurity expert. Most importantly, they'd learned that truth was more powerful than money, that transparency could defeat corruption, and that ordinary people could hold extraordinary power accountable. The tech mogul's digital deception had been exposed, and the world was safer because of it. But as Madison pulled out her laptop to work on her next project, Sarah suspected their adventures in digital justice were far from over. 1 year after the congressional hearing, Sarah stood in the United Nations headquarters in New York, addressing delegates from 192 countries about the International Digital Rights Treaty. Delegates, she began, the corporate surveillance conspiracy we exposed in America was not unique. Similar networks have been discovered on every continent, targeting journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens who threaten powerful interests. The assembly hall was packed with international reporters, human rights advocates, and government officials. Madison sat in the gallery, now 18, and serving as the youngest advisor to the UN's Digital Rights Commission. The evidence before you demonstrates that corporate surveillance has become a weapon against democracy itself. We must act collectively to protect the digital privacy of citizens worldwide. Sarah's presentation included case studies from the global investigation Madison had helped coordinate. Corporate spy networks had been exposed in China, Russia, Brazil, India, and across Europe. The pattern was identical: powerful corporations working with the corrupt officials to silence dissent and manipulate public opinion. Mrs. Mitchell, the German delegate asked, your proposed treaty would require unprecedented corporate transparency. How do we balance privacy rights with business innovation? Delegate Weber, innovation and transparency are not contradictory. The most successful companies in the post-conspiracy era are those that have embraced radical transparency at a competitive advantage. Sarah pointed to the success stories. Tech companies that had voluntarily adopted Truth Network protocols had seen increased consumer trust and market value. Transparency had become profitable. Madison rose to address a technical question from the Japanese delegation. Honorable delegates, the blockchain verification protocols we're proposing don't just protect privacy. They enable innovation by creating trust infrastructure that eliminates the need for surveillance. The teenager's presentation was flawless, displaying technical mastery that impressed cybersecurity experts from around the world. After the session, Sarah and Madison walked through Manhattan, discussing the treaty negotiations. Do you think it will pass? Madison asked. Honestly, 2 years ago I would have said no, but the conspiracy revelations changed everything. People understand that corporate surveillance threatens democracy itself. Sarah's phone buzzed with updates from similar proceedings worldwide. The European Union had already passed comprehensive digital rights legislation. Brazil was implementing mandatory corporate transparency requirements. Even China was grudgingly accepting international monitoring of tech companies. Madison, I need to ask you something serious. What? You're 18 now. You could have any career you want. Are you sure this is the path you want to pursue? Madison stopped walking, looking out at the East River. Mom, 2 years ago, I was a rebellious teenager with computer skills. Now I'm helping write international law that will protect billions of people. How is that not exactly what I should be doing? Sarah understood, but she worried about the pressure her daughter faced. Madison received death threats regularly from corporate interests threatened by transparency initiatives. What about normal things? College friends, dating, experiencing life as a regular young adult? I am experiencing life as a young adult. It's just that my life involves preventing corporate surveillance instead of, I don't know, posting selfies on Instagram. They walked in comfortable silence, watching boats navigate the busy harbor. Sarah reflected on how much their lives had changed since that terrifying day in divorce court. Her phone rang. Judge Walsh, calling with news about the final conspiracy prosecutions. Sarah, I wanted you to know personally, the International Tribunal just handed down sentences for the foreign conspirators. The Chinese executives got 15 years, the Russian oligarchs got 20, and the European corporate spies got 12. That's incredible. It's justice, and it's happening because you and Madison refuse to be silenced. After the call ended, Sarah looked at her daughter with renewed appreciation. Madison was technically a teenager, but she'd accomplished more in 2 years than most people achieve in entire careers. "There's something I haven't told you," Madison said quietly. "What?" "MIT offered me a full professorship. At 18, I'd be the youngest professor in the university's history." Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. "And?" "I turned it down." "Madison, why?" "Because academic work isn't where the real change happens. The Truth Network needs to expand globally. Corporate accountability requires constant vigilance. This work is more important than academic prestige." They reached Sarah's hotel, where international media was waiting for interviews about the treaty negotiations. "Mrs. Mitchell," a BBC reporter called out, "sources suggest the treaty will pass with overwhelming support. How does it feel to have changed international law?" Sarah looked at Madison, then back at the reporter. "I didn't change international law. Millions of people around the world changed it by demanding corporate accountability. Madison and I just provided some of the tools." After the interviews, they sat in Sarah's hotel room, reviewing treaty documents and preparing for the next day's final vote. "Mom, what do you think Dad would say about all this?" The question caught Sarah off guard. They rarely discussed Marcus anymore. "I think he'd be proud of what you've accomplished, even if he disagrees with how you accomplished it." "Do you ever think about visiting him in prison?" Sarah considered the question carefully. Marcus had written letters from federal prison, expressing remorse and asking for forgiveness. She'd never responded. "I'm not ready for that conversation," she admitted. "Maybe someday." Madison nodded, understanding. "I think about it sometimes. He's still my father, despite everything he did." "That's your choice to make when you're ready." The next morning, the UN General Assembly voted on the International Digital Rights Treaty. The final tally was 187 countries in favor, 3 opposed, and 2 abstentions. Sarah watched from the gallery as delegates celebrated the most comprehensive corporate accountability agreement in history. Every major tech company would be required to implement Truth Network protocols within 2 years. "Madison," she whispered to her daughter, "we actually did it." "No, Mom, the world did it. We just helped show them how." As they left the United Nations building, Sarah's phone exploded with interview requests, speaking invitations, and congratulations from supporters worldwide. But the most meaningful message came from Jennifer Walsh. Sarah, Lisa Morrison's sister, just opened a tech company focused on ethical AI development. "The conspiracy victims are becoming the solution leaders. Thank you for showing us that fighting back was possible." Walking through New York's crowded streets, Sarah realized their work had achieved something beyond personal justice. It had created a global movement toward transparency and accountability. "What's next?" she asked Madison. "I've been thinking about that. Corporate surveillance was just one problem. What about government surveillance? Political corruption? International money laundering?" Sarah laughed. "Madison, we just finished changing international law. Can we rest for 5 minutes?" "Actually, I've already started preliminary research on political corruption networks. Did you know that the same blockchain verification principles could expose illegal campaign contributions and lobbying activities?" Sarah looked at her extraordinary daughter, realizing that the fight for transparency would never truly end. Each victory revealed new problems that needed solving. But that was okay. They'd proven that truth was more powerful than money, that ordinary people could hold extraordinary power accountable, and that technology could be used to protect democracy instead of undermining it. The tech mogul's digital deception had been exposed, international law had been changed, and the world was safer. Now it was time to tackle the next challenge. 2 years after the UN treaty passage, Sarah stood in the Austin courthouse where her nightmare had begun, but this time as a witness in the final phase of the criminal trials. The same courtroom that had once hosted her humiliation now served as the venue for corporate accountability. Marcus sat in the defendant's chair wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his expensive suits. The transformation was stark. The confident tech mogul had become a broken man facing multiple life sentences. "Mrs. Mitchell," the federal prosecutor addressed Sarah, "can you describe the systematic nature of the conspiracy your ex-husband led?" Sarah looked directly at Marcus as she answered. "The conspiracy wasn't just about destroying individual women. It was about creating a culture of fear that silenced anyone who threatened corporate power. She presented evidence of the network's global reach, surveillance operations in 37 countries, character assassination campaigns targeting over 300 women, and financial manipulation affecting millions of investors. The defendant used artificial intelligence, blockchain manipulation, and social media warfare. Warfare to systematically destroy lives, Sarah continued, but most importantly, he did it while claiming to innovate for the betterment of humanity. Marcus stared at his hands throughout her testimony. His legal team had abandoned most defenses, focusing instead on avoiding the death penalty. When cross-examination began, Marcus's attorney attempted to portray him as a brilliant innovator who'd lost his way. Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it true that your ex-husband created thousands of jobs and contributed billions to the economy? Innovation built on systematic human rights violations isn't progress, Sarah replied firmly. It's exploitation disguised as entrepreneurship. After her testimony, Sarah met Madison in the courthouse hallway. Her daughter, now 20 and completing her PhD at Stanford, had flown in for the sentencing phase. "How do you feel?" Madison asked. "Empty, honestly. Justice is important, but it doesn't undo the trauma he caused to hundreds of people." They walked outside, where protesters had gathered demanding maximum sentences for all conspiracy defendants. The digital rights movement had grown into a global force with millions of supporters. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you about Dad." Sarah tensed. Madison had been visiting Marcus in prison monthly, despite Sarah's reservations. "What about him?" "He's been helping federal investigators trace international corruption networks. The information he's provided has led to arrests in 12 countries." "Madison, that doesn't change what he did to us and hundreds of other people." "I know, but it's helping other victims get justice." Sarah felt conflicted. Marcus's cooperation was undoubtedly valuable, but she couldn't separate it from his systematic cruelty. That evening, they attended a dinner honoring victims of the conspiracy. The gathering included women from around the world whose lives had been destroyed and then rebuilt through collective action. Sarah, daughter Amanda Rodriguez, addressed the group. "I want to share something personal. 5 years ago, I was a discredited academic working at a coffee shop. Tonight, I'm leading a global task force on AI ethics with a budget of $500 million. Similar stories filled the room. Jennifer Walsh had become CEO of a major tech company focused on privacy protection. Lisa Morrison's sister had built a nonprofit supporting families of corporate abuse victims. "The most important lesson," Jennifer continued, "is that corporate power depends on isolation and silence. When we connected with each other and refused to be silenced, their weapons became useless." Sarah looked around the room at these remarkable women, remembering the scared, pregnant woman she'd been in a divorce court. The journey from victim to advocate had been longer and harder than she'd ever imagined. "There's something else I want to share," Sarah announced to the group. "The Digital Truth Project has received a $1 billion grant from the International Human Rights Council. We're expanding operations to 50 countries." The room erupted in applause. The organization that had started as Sarah's personal quest for justice had become the world's leading advocate for digital rights. Madison stood to address the group. "But our work isn't finished. Corporate surveillance was just the beginning. We need to address government surveillance, political corruption, and international money laundering using the same transparency principles." After dinner, Sarah and Madison walked through downtown Austin, past the former Data Vault headquarters that now housed a digital rights research center. "Madison, can I ask you something that's been bothering me?" "Sure." "Do you ever regret not having a normal young adulthood? You've been fighting global corruption since you were 16. Madison considered the question carefully. "Mom, what's normal? Most 20-year-olds are worried about college grades and dating. I'm helping write international law and protecting democratic institutions. If that's not normal, I'm okay with being abnormal." Sarah's phone buzzed with news updates. The conspiracy trials were concluding worldwide, with sentences ranging from 5 years to life imprisonment. Marcus would likely receive 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. "Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. Forgiveness seems irrelevant compared to preventing future victims." They reached Sarah's apartment, where she lived quietly despite her international prominence. The space was modest but filled with awards, certificates, and photos with world leaders who'd implemented digital rights legislation. Madison, I need to tell you something. I've been offered a position as special advisor to the UN Secretary General on digital rights. That's amazing. Are you taking it? I'm not sure. It would mean living in New York and traveling constantly. I worry about leaving the day-to-day operations of the Digital Truth Project. Madison sat on the couch, pulling out her laptop to review global transparency metrics. Mom, the movement is bigger than any individual now. You've built something that can operate without you. Sarah watched her daughter work, still amazed by the brilliant young woman who'd emerged from a rebellious teenager. Madison had become a global leader in digital rights, respected by governments and corporations worldwide. There's something else, Sarah continued. I've been thinking about writing a book about our experience. What would you call it? The Truth Network: How Transparency Defeated Corporate Power. Madison looked up from her laptop. I think that's a great idea. Our story needs to be preserved so future generations understand how we fought back against surveillance capitalism. They worked together until late in the evening, Sarah writing while Madison coded improvements to the Truth Network's verification protocols. The partnership that had started as mother and daughter had evolved into a professional collaboration between equals. Sarah's phone rang at midnight, the federal prosecutor calling with the final verdict. Mrs. Mitchell, Marcus Mitchell, has been sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole on all charges. The judge called it the most comprehensive corporate accountability case in American legal history. Sarah felt no satisfaction, only relief that the legal proceedings were finally over. Madison, she said after hanging up, it's finished. No, Mom, the trials are finished. The work continues. Sarah looked at her remarkable daughter, understanding that their fight for transparency and accountability would never truly end. Each victory revealed new challenges requiring constant vigilance. But they'd proven that ordinary people could hold extraordinary power accountable, that truth was more powerful than money, and that technology could be used to protect democracy instead of undermining it. The tech mogul's digital deception had been exposed, justice had been served, and the world was safer. Now it was time to prevent the next conspiracy before it could begin. 5 years after Marcus's final sentencing, Sarah stood before the largest gathering of digital rights advocates in history. The Global Transparency Summit in Geneva brought together 10,000 activists, technologists, and government officials from every continent. Friends, Sarah began her keynote address. When my daughter and I sat in that Austin courthouse 7 years ago, we couldn't have imagined that our fight for personal justice would become a global movement for democratic transparency. The audience included familiar faces from their journey. Judge Walsh, now serving on the International Criminal Court; Jennifer Walsh, CEO of Truth Tech Industries; Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, Director of the UN's AI Ethics Division; and Agent Coleman, who'd become head of the Global Cybercrime Task Force. Madison, now 25, and the youngest person ever appointed to the UN Security Council's Technology Advisory Board, sat in the front row with other world leaders. The Truth Network has processed over 10 billion transactions, verified evidence in 3,000 criminal cases, and prevented corporate surveillance in 97 countries, Sarah continued. But our greatest achievement is cultural. We've made transparency the global standard for corporate and government accountability. Sarah's presentation included stunning statistics. Corporate surveillance incidents had decreased by 87% worldwide. Digital rights legislation had been passed in 160 countries, and over 50 conspiracy networks had been exposed using Truth Network protocols. Mrs. Mitchell, a journalist, called out during the question period, critics argue that radical transparency has made legitimate business operations more difficult. How do you respond? I'd argue the opposite, Sarah replied. Companies operating with Truth Network transparency report higher consumer trust, better employee satisfaction, and stronger financial performance. Honesty isn't a business burden. It's a competitive advantage. Madison rose to address a technical question from the audience. The next phase of the Truth Network involves quantum encryption and artificial intelligence verification, the young woman explained. We're building systems that make deception technically impossible, rather than just difficult. After the presentation, Sarah and Madison walked through Geneva's historic streets, reflecting on their extraordinary journey. Madison, do you ever think about what our lives would have been like if Marcus hadn't tried to destroy us? Honestly, no. The path we took led to work that matters. Millions of people have better lives because we fought back. They paused at Lake Geneva, watching boats navigate the calm water. Sarah thought about the scared, pregnant woman she'd been in divorce court, never imagining she'd become a global advocate for digital rights. "I have something to tell you," Madison said quietly. "What?" "I'm pregnant." Sarah turned to stare at her daughter. "Madison, that's wonderful. Who's the father?" "Dr. James Roberts, the cybersecurity researcher from MIT. We've been working together for 2 years." Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, thrilled about becoming a grandmother, but concerned about the timing. "How will you manage pregnancy while serving on the UN Security Council?" "The same way you managed fighting a global conspiracy while pregnant with twins, one day at a time." Sarah laughed, remembering her own fears about balancing motherhood with activism. Madison had learned early that extraordinary circumstances required extraordinary commitment. That evening, they attended a private dinner with other movement leaders. The conversation focused on emerging challenges: authoritarian governments using surveillance technology, corporations developing new forms of digital manipulation, and the need for international cooperation on artificial intelligence governance. "Sarah," Judge Walsh addressed her, "I wanted you to know that the International Criminal Court is establishing a new division focused on digital crimes. We'd like you to serve as the founding director." The offer was tempting, but would require relocating to The Hague and leaving the Digital Truth Project. "I'm honored, but I need time to consider the implications." "Of course, but remember, the next generation of digital rights leaders is ready to take over day-to-day operations. Your role now should be setting international legal precedents." After dinner, Sarah and Madison returned to their hotel, where international media was waiting with questions about the summit's outcomes. "Mrs. Mitchell," a Reuters reporter asked, "7 years ago you were fighting for custody of your children. Now you're shaping international law. What advice would you give to other women facing corporate retaliation?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Document everything, find allies, and never accept that powerful people are above accountability. Truth has a way of surfacing if you're patient and persistent." "Ms. Carter," another reporter addressed Madison, "you've been called the most influential person under 30 in technology policy. How do you balance that responsibility with personal life?" "I don't separate personal and professional life," Madison replied. "Fighting for digital rights isn't my job, it's who I am. The work matters more than personal comfort." Back in their suite, Sarah and Madison reviewed global transparency metrics on Madison's laptop. Corporate surveillance incidents continued declining, while democratic participation was increasing in countries with Truth Network implementation. "Madison, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." "What?" "Do you ever visit your father anymore?" Madison's expression grew complicated. "I stopped last year. He's different now. Broken, but also somehow at peace. He spends his time writing technical manuals for prison education programs." "Does he ask about me?" "Every time. He's written you letters that he never sends. I think he understands that forgiveness isn't something he can request. It's something you might choose to give." Sarah felt a familiar conflict. Marcus's crimes were unforgivable, but time had dulled the sharp edge of anger. "What do the letters say?" "Mostly apologies and explanations. He claims the power corrupted him gradually until he couldn't distinguish between business strategy and personal cruelty." Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from the Digital Truth Project's Austin headquarters. "Mom, breaking news. Chinese government just announced mandatory Truth Network implementation for all tech companies. Your vision is becoming global reality." The text was from Emma and Michael, her 19-year-old twins who were studying computer science at UT Austin while working part-time for the organization. "Your kids are amazing," Madison said, reading over Sarah's shoulder. "They're building transparency tools that make my early work look primitive." Sarah smiled, thinking about her younger children who'd grown up in a world where corporate accountability was the norm rather than the exception. "The next generation won't have to fight the battles we fought," Sarah observed. "They can build on the foundation we established." Madison nodded, then pulled up a new project on her laptop. "Actually, I've been working on something that might interest you." The screen showed blueprints for a global education initiative called Digital Democracy Schools. institutions that would teach transparency principles, ethical technology development, and citizen advocacy skills. The idea is to create a generation that understands corporate power structures and knows how to hold them accountable, Madison explained. We prevent future conspiracies by making the population too sophisticated to manipulate. Sarah studied the proposal, impressed by its ambition and scope. How would you fund something like this? The Truth Network generates significant revenue from licensing fees. Plus, governments worldwide are eager to fund digital literacy programs. They worked together until dawn, refining the education initiative and discussing implementation strategies. The partnership that had started with a desperate teenage daughter helping her victimized mother had evolved into a professional collaboration between equals. As the sun rose over Lake Geneva, Sarah's phone rang. Dr. James Roberts, Madison's partner, calling from MIT. Sarah, I wanted to speak with you personally about Madison's pregnancy and our relationship. James, Madison is 25 and makes her own decisions. You don't need my permission. I know, but I respect your relationship and the work you've done together. I want to assure you that I'll support Madison's career and our family equally. Sarah appreciated the gesture, remembering her own struggles to balance motherhood with advocacy work. James, the best thing you can do is understand that Madison's work isn't optional. It's essential. The world needs her leadership. After the call ended, Madison looked at her mother with appreciation. Thank you for understanding that my work comes first. Madison, I learned the hard way that compromising your principles for anyone leads to destruction. Never apologize for choosing truth over convenience. They spent their final day in Geneva meeting with international leaders, finalizing agreements for Truth Network expansion, and planning the Digital Democracy Schools initiative. At the airport, Sarah made her decision about the International Criminal Court position. Judge Walsh, she called the ICC director, I'll accept the position with one condition. I want to establish a digital crimes prevention division focused on education and early intervention rather than just prosecution. Agreed. When can you start? Give me 6 months to transition Digital Truth Project leadership to the next generation. Madison overheard the conversation and smiled. Mom, you're not retiring from the movement. You're expanding it to international law. Exactly. The fight for transparency and accountability never ends. It just moves to new venues. As their plane lifted off from Geneva, Sarah looked down at the city where international law was written and enforced. Soon she'd be part of that system, working to prevent digital crimes before they occurred. Madison, what do you think we'll be fighting 7 years from now? Probably issues we can't even imagine yet. But whatever challenges emerge, we'll face them the same way, with truth, transparency, and absolute refusal to be intimidated. Sarah smiled, watching her remarkable daughter review technical specifications for quantum encryption protocols. The scared teenager who'd saved their family had become a global leader who was reshaping international law. The plane flew west toward Austin, where Sarah would spend the next 6 months preparing for her final transition from victim to international jurist. The Digital Truth Project would continue under new leadership. The Truth Network would expand to every country on Earth, and the next generation would build on foundations of transparency and accountability. Marcus Mitchell sat in federal prison, serving 3 consecutive life sentences for his crimes against democracy itself. His legacy was one of destruction and betrayal, but inadvertently he catalyzed the largest accountability movement in human history. Sarah's legacy would be different. She'd proven that ordinary people could hold extraordinary power accountable, that truth was more powerful than money, and that technology could protect democracy instead of undermining it. The tech mogul's digital deception had been exposed completely. Justice had been served internationally, and the world was fundamentally safer. But most importantly, Sarah had raised a daughter who would continue the fight for transparency and accountability long after Sarah herself was gone. The Truth Network would endure, digital democracy would flourish, and future conspiracies would face a world that understood the price of silence and the power of speaking truth to power. As Austin appeared below them, Sarah felt complete peace. The journey from victimized wife to international jurist had been longer and harder than she'd ever imagined, but every struggle had been worth it. The age of corporate accountability had begun, and there was no going back.